Straw-necked ibises usually feed and travel in large flocks, which forage over swampland or dry, grassy paddocks alike. The birds are especially attracted to swarms of locusts. Most breeding colonies are in large, secluded lignum swamps. Such colonies are sometimes enormous, numbering as much as several 100,000 nesting birds and sprawling over several square kilometers. The name comes from the unusually stiff yellowish feathers on the throat, which do indeed rather resemble old-fashioned drinking straws. Royal spoonbills live in small groups that wade in shallow water for food, fly in formation from one lagoon or swamp to another, and roost together at night in the branches of dead trees. Both sexes wear the loose, shaggy crest, which is lacking in immature birds. Their style of feeding is distinctive, sweeping their broad, spatulate bills from side to side to gather up yabbies, small fish and similar prey, and swallowing them with an abrupt backward toss of the head. Almost a symbol of the top end, the magpie goose is common across tropical northern Australia, and it also occurs in New Guinea. Once it occurred in Australia much further south than it does today, with substantial populations even in the Murray-Darling Basin. But overhunting and wetlands destruction forced a general retreat northwards. Today, it is gradually being re-established in parts of its former range in the south. Magpie geese almost always occur in large flocks, and a mob rising in thunderous alarm is one of the most memorable experiences of any excursion onto the tropical wetlands of the top end. Black swans are common on wetlands of all kinds right across Australia, but they're generally much more numerous in the south than in the north. Fully mature birds form pairs that last for life, but less stable bonds of various kinds are common among younger birds. Both parents cooperate in caring for the young. Black swans usually build their nests on small islets in shallow lagoons and swamps. The breeding season varies widely from place to place, but it's usually in early spring in the south and autumn in the north of Australia. The grey teal vies with the Pacific black duck for the title of the most numerous Australian duck. Pacific black duck occur in the widest variety of habitats, but grey teal are nearly as ubiquitous, often occurring in much larger flocks, and are strongly nomadic, likely to visit almost any stretch of floodwater, no matter how temporary. It also doesn't mind salt water, which Pacific black duck tend to avoid. Unlike many small ducks, male and female grey teal are nearly identical in plumage. The hardhead is common across Australia, though it generally prefers the largest, deepest and most permanent of wetlands. It's often seen in small groups, but it also sometimes forms very large flocks on large lakes. Plumage differences between the sexes are not especially well marked, but the female is noticeably paler and duller than the male. It dives for almost all of its food, which consists of a roughly equal mix of animal and vegetable material, such as seeds, aquatic insects and small fish. The pygmy geese make up a distinctive group of wild fowl, largely confined to tropical wetlands, and strongly associated with water lilies and similar floating vegetation. The green pygmy goose is the most widespread of Australia's 2 species. These birds are strongly aquatic and usually remain well away from shore. Male and female are similar, but she is a much duller bird with a paler neck and less distinct white cheek patch. Pygmy geese live in small flocks that seldom leave their lagoons and billabongs, though they spend a good deal of time flying to and fro within their territories. Unmistakable. They ride very low in the water, looking rather like dark, bulky submarines. Males are substantially bigger than females and are distinguished by a leathery pouch dangling from the chin. Like grebes, musk ducks are strictly aquatic and are seldom seen in flight. They almost never come ashore and dive for all of their food. This male launches into the opening stages of its bizarre courtship display. Leathery throat pouch fully inflated with air, the bird begins swimming in tight circles. It throws its tail forward, almost over its head, and kicks at the surface in vigorous spasmodic jerks that send plumes of water jetting several meters to either side. The black-shouldered kite is one of Australia's most numerous and widespread birds of prey. It occurs almost everywhere across the continent except for Tasmania and hunts over open country of all kinds, from grassy plains to wasteland in major cities. Mostly it preys on large insects such as grasshoppers, but it also takes mice and similar small mammals, and small reptiles, such as skinks. Young birds resemble their parents, except in showing a good deal of reddish-brown in their plumage. Held aloft on fluttering wings, it perches motionless in mid-air, peering at the ground, usually 10 or 20 meters below, until it spots a victim. Then it pounces. Australia has several large birds of prey, but only the wedge-tailed eagle has a long, full, diamond-shaped tail that looks so obvious in flight. Its wings span some 2.5 meters. Young eagles have pale and mottled plumage, but they tend to get darker as they mature, and birds over 6 or 7 years old look nearly black. Eagles feed mainly on small mammals, hunting them by soaring at great height and scanning the ground below for movement. But they also rely heavily on carrion and can sometimes be seen by the roadside, feasting on the carcass of some unfortunate beast killed by traffic. A typical falcon preys mainly on other birds, which it captures in mid-air by overwhelming them with sheer speed and skill in flight. Not so the brown falcon, which feeds mostly on large insects, such as locusts and small mammals, such as mice, and gets by with a much lazier approach to its hunting. It glides low over the ground, sometimes hovers clumsily, and is often encountered perched on roadside fences and telephone posts. One of Australia's most widespread and abundant birds of prey, the brown falcon is notorious among bird watchers for its bewildering range of plumage states. Individuals may be dark brown or pale, or almost any stage in between. The Australian brush turkey is a member of a family of birds known as mound builders because of their unique breeding habits. These birds do not build nests. Instead, the male builds a large mound of earth and leaf litter on the forest floor, raking it into a heap with his large feet. Females visit to lay their eggs and bury them in the mound, where they are incubated by warmth generated by the fermenting vegetation, and the chicks ultimately hatch and wander away without any parental involvement of any kind. The brush turkey is common in coastal and highland forests of eastern Australia, from Cape York to not far north of Sydney. Unlike most quail-like birds, the painted button quail inhabits woodlands rather than grasslands, and is particularly common where leaf litter is abundant and grazing by livestock inhibited. It is entirely terrestrial in habits and flies only when hard pressed by danger. Even then, it usually flies only 100 meters or so, low on rapid whirring wings. The birds live in pairs or small coveys, feeding on insects and seeds. Button quail are unusual among birds in that the female is larger and more boldly patterned than the male, and takes the initiative in courtship and breeding. Rails, like this buff-banded rail, are small, rather chicken-like birds that inhabit dense swamp and marsh vegetation. Because they're extremely secretive, their presence often goes undetected, but they're generally very common nonetheless. Adding to their secretive reputation is the fact that they're often more active at night than during the day, especially during the breeding season. The buff-banded rail is common in coastal and near-coastal districts around Australia, and it also has an extensive distribution in New Guinea, New Zealand, and islands of the southwestern Pacific. Of the 3 species of crakes widespread in southern Australia, the Australian crake is the most nomadic and least restricted to permanent wetlands. It's often common on temporary floodwaters in the interior. Also called the spotted crake, its prominent white undertail coverts and red and green bill are its most obvious field marks. Like all crakes, it nervously flicks its tail constantly as it walks. Though it usually forages alone, loose flocks occasionally form where food is temporarily abundant.